on-site giant tent event is back for 5 days only at all 9 San Diego County Toyota dealers. The tents are up, the prices are down. Get huge savings on all remaining 98 Toyotas and the full...
When I saw him, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about because we have a class shorthand. I'm not going to bother introducing him because we've been introducing him for 3 weeks. And you probably know more about him than he wants you to know anyway. You know, he's going to talk about language. You know his qualifications to talk about language. You know the generosity of the Berman Institute. Here I said I wasn't going to do that, and I've done a little. But we've talked about all of this. My heart is in not turning the class over for 2 weeks. As I told him, you folks are absolutely delightful. I hope you want me back. And of course you will, because I have a great book. Okay, Sanford.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Larry. Let me pass out the little outline or read things I will cover. Just pass it around if you will, please. And when you do communicate to me, and this is going to be a little bit of a course on public speaking, project your voice. How many of you have never had a course in public speaking? All of you have had course in public speaking? Yeah. Good. Let me start off by asking a question. I want to know your interests. Why did you take this course?
Just remind them that 50% of the grade is on class participation. You watch out.
Well, I didn't
watch all the
said
hands
that.
go up.
Why?
Attaboy, Scott.
But actually, I think it's a really interesting class.
You're interested in, notice how many different teachers are going to teach. Never realized there were so many aspects of communication. Any other?
One of my professors described it last and I found it interesting and actually said I needed another class.
I see, good. And this is something new, by the way, what Larry has constructed. Last time I saw a class like this, I was a student of Irving J. Lee at Northwestern University. Did any of you get his book? This is one of the texts, Language, Habits, and Human Affairs, that I just edited a few years ago. And in an advanced class in general semantics, he invited Wendell Johnson, the author of People in Quandaries. I'll put that book on the board. It's an excellent book for you to look into. And S.I. Hayakawa, who wrote Language in Action. Russell Myers, who is a neurologist who wrote on general semantics. Anatole Rappaport, who is perhaps our greatest brain genius, mathematician, biologist. So general semantics deals with a lot of different areas. And we're concerned with language and communication. And this is, of course, the kind of course that Larry constructed. As you will see, there's an awful lot to it. Any other answers of why you took the course? You're all communication majors? Uh-huh. Okay, what is semantics? Anyone? Anybody know what semantics deals with? All right. Semantics deals with the meaning of words or the history of meaning changes. And there are many different schools of semantics. Lady Welby, around the turn of the century, was one of the innovators. Charles Morris and his semiotics. Wittgenstein was a very famous philosopher who wrote on language and meaning. He was a genius, but he was also a schizophrenic. He either tried to commit suicide many times or he succeeded. But he worked with Bertrand Russell. He was a student of Bertrand Russell, another name in semantics. In fact, right now, the research I'm doing, now that I've retired, I spend all my time reading books that I haven't had a chance to read in the last 30, 40 years, and writing them. My main interest is in the philosophy of science, Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum mechanics as applied to general semantics. Because general semantics basically is different than semantics. People confuse the two. In fact, our good friend S.I. Hayakawa, the late Hayakawa, who was our senator, he wrote a book called Language in Action, which was a Book of the Month Club selection in 1941. And he was my first professor after getting my master's degree from Teachers College, Columbia University. After getting it, I saw that he was going to offer a course in semantics, which is different than general semantics. And after taking it, I don't know where I got the $9. I was broke through my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, but I bought Science and Sanity, which is the Bible of general semantics. This is called the Blue Peril. And for 40 years, I've said somebody should rewrite Science and Sanity. And I guess I'll have to rewrite it. Now, I've been wondering how to rewrite it. I've already bought a file cabinet, and I went back in the index, and out of all of the main ideas, because ideas here will be page 3, 19, 45, 62, all the way through the book. Just as I did when I edited a book on, well, logic and general semantics. Those of you, and you should have it in the libraries after a while, Brian, my main interest is on logic. Aristotle's logic. See, general semantics is a non-Aristotelian way of thinking, communicating, and behaving. Aristotle was perhaps the greatest intellect in the history of man. He invented logic, deductive logic, two-valued logic. A statement is either true or false. You all are all familiar with the syllogism. But after Aristotle, we found out that we not only have two-valued logic, we have three-valued logic. A statement is not only true, false, or indeterminate. And then we have four-valued logics. A statement is not only true, false, indeterminate, or ambiguous. And so other logicians, especially the Polish logicians, and these are the ones that I'm working in, I get many, many books and underline all of them on the Polish logicians who have added to the two-valued Aristotelian logic. Now, Oliver Reiser was a famous professor of philosophy from the University of Pittsburgh, and he wrote a book called The Promise of Scientific Humanism. Some of you may be interested in that. Reiser, if you're interested in the history of thought. In his book, The Promise of Scientific Humanism, he showed pre-Aristotelian mythological primitive thinking. And then Aristotle, 384, 322 BC, he developed the syllogism and modern formal logic. And what I did in editing this book is to take part one, where Dr. Reiser has presented the whole history of pre-Aristotelian, Aristotelian, and modern non-Aristotelian thinking or logic. That's what general semantics is. So let me give you a simple definition of this book. This book was written by Alfred Korzybski. And it is called Science and Sanity. The scientific method as the sane way of behaving. And I don't have to tell you how much ignorance and stupidity, misevaluations, insane behavior we have in the world. I'm going to have you to keep a little semantic or communication diary, because I want you not only to learn something in class, but to get it into your nervous system. In fact, we're trying to, I hope we can bring here is there's a young professor who has training sessions in general semantics. And this is what Irving Lee and I talked about, my professor at Northwestern, when unfortunately he died at the young age of 45 of cancer. I would have been a professor at Northwestern. They invited me to join the faculty, but I was broke. And the head of the public address department, Ernest Ragey, chose his own assistant as his assistant. I was let out in the cold, and I had to choose another profession. So I moved into a different direction for about 35 years or more. Now, general semantics, I'll give you my simple definition. We all have different definitions. General semantics is not the same as semantics. Hayakawa has confused them, and Korzybski was quite angry at him for confusing general semantics with semantics. Originally, Korzybski, before he published Science and Sanity, he called general semantics the science and art of human engineering. And almost the day before publication, he realized that he was in the area of meanings. So he changed the title to General Semantics. Now we have in the audience here the president of the Institute of General Semantics, and then we have another group, the International Society of General Semantics in the San Francisco area. They put a hyphen between general and semantics. And I'm not in favor of that as Korzybski's executor of his estate, because general semantics is not the same as semantics. It is not semantics, general or specific. It is a noun, general semantics. So the simple definition is, general semantics is the study of the relationship between language, thought, and human behavior. General semantics is the study of the relationship between language, thought, and human behavior. Now, in Dr. Lee's class at Northwestern University, he called it language and thought. And I asked him, why didn't you say, language, thought, and behavior? And he says, well, the psychology professors, psychology boys, they think that behavior is within their province. But obviously, you cannot separate thinking and behavior, and we are concerned with that. Now, as you can see, I developed, and this is what I want to introduce to the professors here. I changed Dr. Lee's course around a little bit. As you can see, I've used these for about 40 years. These are what I call the Berman quizzes. And I've had secretaries say to me, why don't you let me redo it? And I've had someone do it. But there are a lot of pleasant memories with this. So if you'll take a notebook, please, writing material, and I want to give you one of the little quizzes. And I hope that Brian and Larry and some of the other teachers might be interested in teaching this way. And I will explain why later on. Okay. Now, you remember when most of you are too young to remember when Bishop Sheen was lecturing on television, and then all of a sudden when he'd come back, magically the board was erased. Well, I don't have that privilege. So let me use the blackboard, which I use quite a bit. And what I'm teaching you is the Irving J. Lee method of teaching general semantics. He was such a marvelous teacher compared to many of the other professors that I had. And this is why I hope to share with you this way of teaching. Okay, Roman numeral 1. And if you will mark down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Roman numeral 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then Roman numeral 3. 1 through 19. And let's see what we can learn from this. All right. If you'll answer category number 1, either A, B, or any way you want. Answer. Which girl do you think is more beautiful? A, Diane Darling, or B, Elsie Zadrowski? Number 2A, Bessie Hackcraft, or B, Louise Love? Number 3A, Lisa Hoy, or B, Joy Lamar? Number 4, A, Lorette LaRue, or B, Fedora Aardvark? Number 5A, Letitia He, or B, Ann Starr? All right, the second set, still number 1. Which fellow do you think is more handsome? Number 1, A, Tim Condon, or B, Abe Schwartz? Number 2A, Ellen Dole, or B, Nick Nepopoulos? Number 3A, Tiger Krachorish, or B, Bill White? Number 4A, Robert Jones II, or B, Toivo Kintunen? I had to get that one in. I'm from Minnesota. A lot of Finnish people up there, and when I had seminars in Minneapolis, there was quite a response. Okay, number 5A, Clark Blake, or B, Anton Giuseppe? All right, now, number 2. I'm going to read a story to you, and in terms of the facts of the story, answer either true, false, or don't know. All right, here's the story. Jim Jones was standing on the corner waiting for a bus. The corner was dark and lonely. Jim knew that many robbers were around that neighborhood because he was familiar with it. While he was waiting for the bus, a man sneaked up behind him and hit him on the back. Jim whirled around quickly and caught the man with a hard right squarely on the jaw. All right, answer the following questions either true, false, or don't know. Number 1, the bus Jim was waiting for was late. Number 2, Jim was right in hitting the man before he robbed him. Number 3, such intelligent action will always result in capturing more robbers. Number 4, this robber should have hit Jim Jones harder before he had a chance to turn around. Number 5, the robber landed on the sidewalk and did not succeed in his attempt. And number 6, Jim should not have struck the man. Okay, and now number 3, 1 through 19, and each one of these you see will deal with a different communication principle, general semantics that I will get into. Okay, answer either yes or no, and I'm going to go quite quickly as we ordinarily do in communication. Answer either yes or no. Do you know what or whom I mean when I say, number 1, President Roosevelt? Number 2, President Truman. Number 3, third strike. Number 4, time. Number 5, Harper's Magazine. Number 6, life. Number 7, star. Number 8, face. Number 9, glass. Number 10, Ford. Number 11, Lincoln. Number 12, Washington. Number 13, Elliott Roosevelt. Number 14, Franklin Roosevelt. Number 16, Jack Benny. You can see how old this quiz is. Number 16, Rochester. Number 17, Lucky Strike. Number 18, cigarette. Number 19, camel. Okay. Now, let's go over some of these. Number 1, how many of you answered A for number 1? All right, and how many of you answered B? Okay, number 1 is Diane Darling. Who had A? All right, why did you have Diane Darling? Sounded like your name? Oh, that's better yet. And why did you have yes? Sounds prettier, A? Okay, any other answers for A? Pretty much summarized, yeah.
Only a pretty girl would dare have a name like that.
Okay. Who had B and why? Yeah, why?
Because names aren't everything.
Therefore you had B.
Well, because I don't think that name, it's something her parents gave Roland, Diane Darling. It's something her parents gave her. It's not necessarily indicative of whether she's pretty or not.
Okay. Anybody else have B? Only one? Why did you have B?
I knew somebody named Elsie that I liked a lot.
You knew somebody like that?
I knew someone named Elsie that I liked a lot.
Not too pretty?
She was actually.
Anybody else have another answer? No? Okay, number 2, A. Bessie Hackcraft. Who had A for Bessie Hackcraft? Nobody? You didn't? You picked them random? No logic to? Because usually people who say B for number 1, Elsie Zadrowski, they like Bessie Hackcraft over Louise Love.
I'm just saying when your name doesn't necessarily mean, well, it
Right.
doesn't necessarily get your parents.
Okay.
So it could have been either one.
Then how come you didn't answer neither one, A, B? Anybody have nothing? I said answer either A, B, or any way you want. Right? And what should the answer be? Do you know how beautiful or handsome a person is by looking at their name or hearing their name? Yes, you did. You answered, didn't you? Right? So what should the answer have been for all of these? Don't know. Yeah. This is general semantics. We'll get into the first principle.
You can find beauty in the name, can't you?
What was that?
You can find beauty in the name.
You can find beauty in the name?
Yeah. So
Yes, you can. That's what she was just doing. What is this called? You can project anything into a name.
the
Precisely.
name itself is beautiful and more beautiful, not necessarily what the person looks like.
Precisely. To some people. But to other people, that same name may not be so beautiful. How many of you are taught in high school that words have meaning? Is that what you're taught here at San Diego State? That's why we have misunderstandings. That'll be the last principle I will get to. Are meanings in words? Look at all the different meanings you had. Are they? Is that what you were taught? Okay. I don't ask you to agree with me. But as we will say, keep an open mind. This is one of the important principles that I'll be teaching, and this is why this particular course at the University of Chicago, the Management Development Seminar, was so important to top executives in business and industry. In fact, the course, when I first took it over, it was an elective. And then they said they felt all the executives should get it, because there are a lot of semantic misunderstandings in business and industry. And I hope that those of you who are majoring in communication, and I will share with you later on this way of teaching. When I had my company in Chicago, before coming to San Diego, I was not only teaching, but I was a management and communication consultant. And you can make an awful lot of money, and I know people aren't interested in making money, especially in a college or a university, but it's a need that business and industry has. Because what's the biggest problem in business and industry, and in life basically just about? Communication. And they need communication consultants. And I hope that some of you may think in terms of this direction. And I'm very happy to share my technique with you. This is why I set up the chair. This is why I hope that some of you might be interested in general semantics, because people need it. Why do they need it? Because most of us, as Korzybski said in Science and Sanity, we're not very sane. That's why he called it Science and Sanity. We have misevaluations. For example, what is this? Anyone? Chalk. All right. And what is this? Eraser. See, my course is very easy. All right. Pinch your finger and tell me what you felt. Huh? Pain? I didn't say to pinch that hard. Okay. What did you feel? Pressure. I think those are the first two that always come up. Okay, and we can get many other kind of answers. Again, what is that? Chalk. And what is that? Eraser. All right. What is that? Chalk. What is that? Eraser. What is that? What? Wait, a little while ago I asked you, what is that? And what did you say? Chalk. A little while ago I asked you, what is that? And what did you say? Chalk. Is this this? It used to be. Is this this? No. All right, you're learning one of the most important principles in general semantics. In fact, Alfred Korzybski said that we are living in two different worlds, two different ways of responding to people, situations, and things. Because you put a label on a person, and brother, you got them. Right? We act as if they're all the same. Stereotypes. And only general semantics that I know of teaches you how not to fall victim to false stereotypes. Psychology textbooks and classes, they talk about don't stereotype people. But they don't have a technique of teaching you how not to stereotype people, situations, and things. In other words, here we have the nonverbal world of reality. Put quotes around it because the world of reality is different for all of us. All right? There are two different ways of responding to people, situations, and things. Most of us respond to people, situations, and things in terms of the label. Put a label on a person, and boy, you've got them. As if they're all the same. Whereas general semantics emphasizes the differences. And we want you and me to respond to people, situations, things, etc., not in terms of words and verbal associations, not in terms of the picture I get of you when I'm looking at you, which is a very abstract, inadequate abstraction. But I want to know you. I don't know you. You don't know me. There's a lot more to you than just your face or your name. But most of us are superficial in our ways of evaluating the world of reality. So in general semantics, we want to train people, not just teach, on the intellectual and cortical level. We want to train people to behave intelligently. And what do we mean by intelligently? We mean in terms of the facts. Your reaction and my reaction should be in terms of facts, not in terms of words, verbal associations. We are literally hypnotized by words and verbal associations. In general semantics, again, this is the label. We look beyond the label. This is called a verbal, or basically intentional orientation. And at the end of my 6 lectures, I will pass out, I have an outline of about 10 or 15 characteristics of the intentionally oriented person, or the unscientific behavior. And I can only hint at many of them. This is not a full semester course, but I'll try to get to as many as I can. And the opposite of the verbal orientation, or the intentional orientation, is the extensional orientation. The extensional orientation, or the factual orientation. And only Korzybski emphasized the difference between a verbal orientation and an extensional or factual one. And I think that all of you will agree we are pretty much verbally oriented in our world. Am I right? Think about that. Only the scientist gets down to the nonverbal orientation. He sees, he looks, he pauses, delays, analyzes the structure of the world of reality. In other words, what I'm saying here, and this is a very, very important principle, is the word is not the thing. The word is not the thing. And the reason we are so verbally oriented is because we pay millions of dollars to very bright advertising agencies to condition us automatically to respond to words as if they were the thing, to respond to the label when we don't even know what's inside the product. So we are trained to have an intentional or verbal orientation. And I will give you several different principles to teach you how to be scientific. The extensional orientation is the scientific method, as I will teach you and give you handout near the end of the course. Now, the word is not the thing. Here's some examples to emphasize this important principle. The late W.C. Handy, father of the blues, enjoyed telling this story. For a recital at the Alabama Agricultural and Mechanical College, I dug up an old piece of music called My Ragtime Baby. I knew it wasn't dignified enough, so I put it down the program as Greetings to Toussaint L'Ouverture, and I played it. Under that title, even the president and the dean thought it was great music, and I never did tell them different. A college science professor put in a request for a washroom mirror in his department. His request was denied on the grounds that a mirror was classified as a non-scientific item. The undaunted professor then put in a new request. This time his mirror was provided promptly. The only change in his requisition was the use of a more technical terminology. He asked for one human reflector. In Atlanta, city aldermen voted down a bill to allow licensed gigolo services to operate in Atlanta, but the bill passed easily when the word gigolo was changed to escort. And of course, they have a lot of escort services in Las Vegas, and they're not escort services. Some years ago, the word is not the thing. Some years ago, the Brown Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky, adopted the custom of naming a room in the inn for each winner of the Kentucky Derby. There's a Zev room, a Gallon Fox room, a Whirlaway room, and so forth. But after the 1946 Derby, the management decided to abandon the practice. The winner that year was assault. A man was angry at his dog. His first impulse was to kill the dog, but he decided against it. He said it was wrong to kill a dog. All I'm going to do, he said, is to give him a bad name. So he called his dog a mad dog. Then someone else came and killed the dog. This is one of my favorites, because what I'm trying to do in a very short time is try to teach you not only intellectually or cortically, but how to get this stuff into your nervous system. That's why I created the little quizzes, because we've had especially philosophy professors who criticize science and sanity say, yeah, that's old stuff. We don't behave that way. Well, to quote Dr. Hayakawa in his book, Symbol, Status, and Personality, students of general semantics are often derided for the emphasis they place on the rule that the word is not the thing. Everyone, their critics say scornfully, knows that. One can only reply, the hell they do. Of course, everyone says he knows the difference between words and things. But instead of listening to what people say, let us notice how they act. And so we have found in life, especially here, awful lot of people respond to people, situations, and things in terms of words. Have you ever had this kind of training before, or teaching? I know very few. And yet it is fundamental to know the difference between a verbal way of thinking, communicating, and behaving, and a factual. Learning something intellectually and getting it into your nervous system. And this example here beautifully illustrates the difference. The difference between the verbal and nonverbal world was impellingly illustrated by the late Eddie Rickenbacker, then president of Eastern Airlines. He had over 160 of his employees in Miami Beach for a convention, and their luggage had been delayed. Their luggage was in Albany, Boston, Charlotte, North Carolina, all over the East Coast. They complained to the airline authorities, people at the airport, and were forced to pick up toothpaste, toothbrush, clothes, etc., and the other necessities to attend the convention. At the opening meeting, Rickenbacker looked over the rostrum and said, "See what I mean? I've been yelling at you. I've been sending you messages every week, a bulletin saying, don't lose their luggage. If you lose it, we lose them." Apparently, this didn't make any difference. Now, how the hell do you like it? how do you like it? He had deliberately delayed their luggage. Word is not the nonverbal feeling. An employee of Eastern Airlines had said up to this time, when somebody would lose a piece of luggage, they would walk up to me in the airport and say, "I lost my luggage." I felt like saying, well, don't bother me with this foolishness. Now when it happens, it is something different. Now it is under my skin. I know how it feels when it is under my skin. There is a real difference. And so in general semantics we say, how can we get this under our skins? How can we behave this way? How can we stop jumping to conclusions before we do so? How can we stop having a closed mind before we do so? These are the title of my books. How can we stop having misunderstandings before we do so? We have not been trained in this particular way of thinking, communicating, and behaving. Now, what I've been talking about are called misevaluations. Now, there's another kind of a misevaluation. The one there I was talking about, the word is not the thing. Here's an example that we can show. Take a pail of water. Put a glass partition in between the pail of water. Put a bunch of minnows on one side and put a northern pike, situation one. Put a northern pike on the other side of the partition, and what will the northern pike try to do? Eat the minnows, right? And if you leave it there 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 40 times perhaps, sooner or later, the northern pike will stop. It knows that if it keeps bumping up the pane of glass, it'll hurt its nose, it'll get hurt. Can't get at the minnows. Those are the facts of situation one. Now, take away the pane of glass and allow the minnows to swim all around the northern pike, even bumping up against it. These are the facts of situation two. But the northern pike knows what it knows. And if you leave it there long enough, it will literally die of starvation. This, my friends, I argue, is stupidity. The refusal to change our ways of thinking to fit the changing facts. So what we are trying to teach in general semantics is what constitutes intelligent behavior. What constitutes intelligence? We have in one situation what we call a proper evaluation. A proper evaluation in everything that we do. A proper evaluation is an evaluation that is intelligent. I'll use the same word again. It's proper in terms of the facts, fitting, and leads to, proper behavior, good results, any words you want to put there. But it's basically an intelligent way to respond. My two favorite words in both of my professions have always been ignorance and stupidity. This is why I went into the other occupation that I do. Because as I found many, many years ago, at the University of Minnesota, we had a course in parapsychology. Dr. William Heron put on a demonstration of hypnosis. I didn't believe in hypnosis. I was an undergraduate. I'd never seen it before. I said to myself, what is this academic professor doing this carnival stuff for? I didn't believe in it. Then after seeing Dr. Heron's demonstration with fellow classmates, I believed in it. No, Dr. Heron, notice what he did. He got off the verbal level. He got down to the nonverbal, experiential, factual level. And it's a good thing that the authorities at the University of Minnesota were open-minded. They allowed him to do that year after year after year. While I was teaching public speaking at the Illinois Institute of Technology, I had a speech student who was a very terrific stutterer. I hypnotized him. I regressed him back to his childhood, got to the cause of his stuttering. This is called hypnoanalysis, same as psychoanalysis, except it's with hypnosis, and stopped him from stuttering. Then the chairman of the department said that there's a rule or a law against hypnosis at the Illinois Institute of Technology because the psychology professor years before had put on some demonstrations in class. One parent complained, so they stopped it. And I've been through that. And now you see why I did what I did for so many years. I was not only broke, way to make a living, but it's the only way for me, non-verbally or factually, to get to thousands of people. Because I saw in the 40s and 50s how many MDs and PhDs themselves did not believe in hypnosis. How many people would see the nonverbal facts and they wouldn't believe. This is stupidity. Stupidity is the refusal to change their ways of thinking to fit the facts. My friend Ken Norton became the heavyweight champion of the world. 1970, he got knocked out by Jose Garcia. You see, I not only teach effective communication, but I found here in San Diego that more people would rather learn how to become a millionaire than learn how to lessen misunderstandings. So I also teach success motivation. How do you become successful? Because somewhere along the lines, people should be taught the laws of success. And so I hypnotized Ken Norton for 2.5 years. He wanted to quit fighting. Taught him 2 famous books, if any of you want to learn the laws of success. The one book is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which is accountable for more million-dollar corporations than any other book. All of us who are teaching success and motivation basically teach this book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And this was Andrew Carnegie's formula of how to become a millionaire. Andrew Carnegie was the wise old Scotsman who came from Scotland penniless. He amassed a fortune, and he gave much of it to the libraries in the 30s, for example, 20s and 30s. The other book is Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz, M-A-L-T-Z. I outlined both of those books, and I've written and recorded 140 educational and success motivation cassettes, because we are not taught in high school or college how to become successful. And somewhere along the line, people should be taught. And the good thing, and this is why I'm offering these chairs at universities, one of the answers of becoming a millionaire or becoming successful is to get specialized knowledge. Knowledge is power. If you have specialized knowledge, and where do you get specialized knowledge? You get it in a university. And I have found that to be a tremendous difference between a college-educated person and a person who hasn't even graduated from high school. And I will tell you that you should not only get your bachelor's degree, but it's going to pay off if you go on to get a master's degree, another year. And then, if you're broke like I was, I used to do bookkeeping for $1 an hour with all the down and outers in Chicago. And before that, I was a radio and sports announcer, And then I was a singing disc jockey after having a master's degree from Teachers College, Columbia. And during the day in northern Minnesota, my hometown, iron ore mines, I worked in the mine as a clerk. I had a master's degree. And the guy who hired me said, with your academic background, why do you want a clerk's job? And I told him the truth. I'm broke, I want to save money, so I can go back and work at my PhD. I had a teaching assistantship, so I became a singing disc jockey at night. And then I took the records that I used to sing over, just kid around with people on the phone, you know, and became a singing bartender in Chicago, the toughest part of Chicago. Never learned how to mix drinks, but I had a place behind the tavern, and I got free hamburgers, and I didn't have enough money to go from Evanston, from Chicago, back up to Evanston for a final exam. And then I had a trio in Chicago with a buddy singing. Many of you have natural, how many of you have natural harmony? How many of you can harmonize? Not too many? See, there aren't too many. And so you have that talent. When I was in high school and college, had trios, quartets. So I had a trio in Chicago, the Dean Leslie Trio. And then when I became a nightclub hypnotist, I had no financial problems whatsoever. But it was not only to earn a living. See, I just didn't want to be a speech teacher in a junior college in Minnesota where it's 40 degrees below zero. If I knew about San Diego State then, and the beautiful weather, that's something else again. But it's ended up real good anyway. So I was completely broke, you see. And so what I'm saying is that it takes another 3-4 years after getting a master's degree or whatever to get your Doctor of Philosophy degree. And don't think that you can't get it. The ones getting advanced degrees are not necessarily smarter than other people. They've got one of the principles that you'll find in Think and Grow Rich. Determination. They keep plugging. They keep going. And that is the important thing. Let me just finish with this one. And here you see I have many examples. What I'd like to have you do now, write down, is to start out with having a communication diary, semantic or communication diary. Because it's not only what you learn in class, but what you can observe and see and do outside of the classroom. Start looking for examples of misevaluations. Start looking for people who have fights, arguments, disagreements, killings. We will define these in the course. Why they look at dad jailed and boy's death, he hangs himself. You talk about different kinds of misevaluations. Suicide blamed on frustration. There's something wrong with this way of thinking. Mrs. Marion Harry, 60, drowned herself because she couldn't squeeze her entire application number on her old age pension form, a coroner's jury decided. This is a way of thinking. Well, let me just conclude with this one example here relative to changing our ways of thinking to fit the facts. So start reading the newspaper differently. Look for examples of misunderstandings, verbal confusion in yourself, in others, etc. And let me just finish with this one example here to show you another kind of a misevaluation. During a heavy flood, a girl was perched on top of a house with a small boy. As they watched articles float along, they noticed a derby hat on the water. Presently, the hat turned and came back, then turned again and went downstream. After it went away, it turned and came back again. The little girl said, "You see that derby? First it goes downstream, then it turns and comes back." The boy replied, "Oh, that's Father. He said, come hell or high water, I'm going to cut the grass today." Well, there's something wrong with that way of thinking, communicating, behaving, if it's not scientific. And let me just end, and I'll see you on Wednesday, and let me just say, don't forget, the trouble with Adam and Eve was not a red apple, but a green pear. Thank you.
I've asked Dr. Berman to stop a few minutes early. I have your exams. I'm going to pass them out and talk about them. I don't want to give them out now. And then he has an article he wants you to read. And so I clear off that and we'll give that out at the end of the hour. All right, you've settled in. And I was pleased that whatever is motivating you to take notes, it's none of my business, and I'll never know the truth anyway. But at least I'm glad you're taking notes, because much of what's being talked about is part of the Lee book. And remember, on the 2nd, we have a third exam, and a lot of it comes from the Irving Lee book that Dr. Berman redid.
Do you remember that's 11 chapters?
Yes. But isn't that a compliment? That I think you're all so bright that you can handle 11 chapters? I have a line I'm going to use now. How come you're not smiling? Now, that's not bad.
I'll be smart. Are you going to give us a study guide?
Yes, of course I'll give you a study guide. Give you a study guide. Give you a study guide. Oh, what did we say? The 9th. It's the 9th. It's the 9th. It's the 9th. We'll talk some more about the 11 chapters. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's settle in and we'll talk about the exams at the end of the hour. Okay.
Thank you, Larry. Let me start off by asking you, how many of you saw me on television last night?
With 11 chapters, they don't have time.
If you did, you weren't studying. I was surprised, too. I was watching a movie of Muhammad Ali, history of Muhammad Ali, and as I told you, I hypnotized Ken Norton for 2.5 years, right through, and he broke Muhammad Ali's jaw. Norton wanted to quit fighting, and I was having I teach not only communication, but I told you, while I was in San Diego, I found out more people would rather learn how to become a millionaire than learn how to lessen misunderstandings. So I shifted into, and I also teach success motivation, which I will hint at here too, because it's very, very important. Start, and I gave you the name of a couple of books, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz, because this is communication, psycho-cybernetics. It's much more important to learn how to communicate to yourself about yourself than it is how to communicate effectively with other people. They're both important sides of the same coin. And so when I hypnotized Ken, he got knocked out by Jose Garcia in 1970. I was having my seminars at the La Jolla Village Inn. Then it was the Holiday Inn. Norton's manager was one of the part owners. And he was sitting in the back. I had a couple hundred students. See, my seminars are under hypnosis and self-hypnosis. Now, I was the first one to start that. Now they call it neuro-linguistic programming. Anthony Robbins, they used to write me letters when he first started and have people walk over hot colds. Well, I don't do that. That's a little more extreme. But this, they're using Milton Erickson's hypnosis and self-hypnosis material. He's a very fine scholar. By the way, he was against stage hypnosis. And there's some MDs, PhDs who are against it because they think you're just an entertainer, which Ken Norton's lawyers tried to inflict on me when I had sued him, by the way, for libel and slander. Jack Murphy wrote in his column that Norton said that I was only a publicity gimmick to promote the first alley fight. And I sued him for libel and slander, and I was awarded $50,000. I only say that because let me assure you, don't get involved in any legal contests. It costs a lot of money, but principle is always more important than money, and that's why I sued him. And Ken and I are good friends, but he didn't listen to everything, and I will talk to you about the importance of don't be bashful. At UCSD, I had a seminar, a class called How to Become Successful in Everything You Do. I didn't make the title, they did. Larry knows the word everything allness-oriented, and I'll talk about that. And then a book publisher wanted me to write a book on it, and then I was involved in so many things I really didn't write in the 30 years I was in San Diego. Now I'm going to start writing. In fact, I rediscovered my lecture notes, and I'm amazed at how many good educational things there are. Not that I did it, but things that I did not include in my other book, which is How to Think, Communicate, and Behave Intelligently, an Introduction to General Semantics, with all of my jokes and illustrations. I wrote that as I was traveling around the country, so it is not scholarly. And I've had one chapter to go, and I'm going to finish that, hopefully, while I'm here. I brought 2 typewriters. I got a different room, a kitchenette with 2 beds on it. One bed, it's all full of my lecture notes and these books and everything. And now I can do some scholarly work, as I do in Las Vegas. I live in a suburb of Las Vegas. Now, Larry liked the fact that I told you that I was broke, working for $1 an hour. And what I don't want you to think is that I'm talking about myself. People don't like that. But as Dr. Bois, Sam Bois, and I'll write some more books on the board for tomorrow, in the introduction to one of his books, he said, who else's nervous system can I write about? You see what I'm saying? Trying to share some of these experiences. And I was afraid that maybe, quotes, I hit you too hard or you didn't understand. But if I were to ask you right now, which girl do you think is more beautiful? Number 1A, Diane Darling, or Elsie Zadrowski? You'd have a different answer, wouldn't you? Which means you've learned. And the reason why I set up these chairs here, and by the way, Larry, we had a meeting with UCSD at noon yesterday, and admittedly, their communication department, they're going to take a couple of years to scour the world for a general semantics scholar. But they're interested in theory. So I talked to the chairman, told him that Dr. Lee and I, and our school of thought, we're interested in teaching you how to internalize the principles of general semantics, how to get it into your nervous system. This is why Alfred Korzybski entitled his book, as I told you yesterday, Science and Sanity. The scientific method as the sane way of behaving. And I think that all of you will agree that we're not very sane. I'll go into that very shortly. You see, I've read the book once. Well, actually, I've underlined it, and this is how I read books right now. I've got over 250 scholarly books that I'm underlining, studying, and I will give you hints at how to study. That's not communication, but it's very important. I had to learn it the hard way, because when I was in high school, I never read a book. Well, I come from Minnesota. We played basketball and football day at night in 4 feet of snow. And you were sissy if you were reading books. When I went to the University of Minnesota, I didn't have any money. I had to read. I was living on a box of, and they were 12-cent Cheez-Its. I hated Cheez-Its for many, many years. And White Castle 10-cent hamburgers. And then at the University, Teachers College, Columbia, I went there. Fortunately, Hayakawa was a visiting lecturer, as I mentioned, and I got that special scholarship with Irving Lee. But I don't know if I told you that while other students were writing their final exam, paper and pencil, 10 pages, I brought a typewriter, and I wrote a 50-page final exam. I was really interested in general semantics because when I was an undergrad, we had courses in public speaking. But I said, why don't we have courses in communication? There were not any courses in communication. By this I mean a combination of logic and modern logic, psychiatry, psychology, neurology, philosophy of science, how to talk factually. And I developed my own theories, doing my research. And when I dug up the $9 and bought this book, Science and Sanity, I said, holy smokes, Korzybski did my research for me. And I stopped that research, and this is it. Now, you don't like to talk about dying, but I'm trying to work real fast to get all this done. I'm very fortunate physically. I feel great and everything. But I hope to, for 40 years I've said, somebody has to rewrite Science and Sanity. While these books are popularizations of a lot of the ideas of Science and Sanity, no one has really rewritten it. And I didn't know how. I've underlined it at least twice. And just lately, I bought another file cabinet. And fortunately, you can get these file cabinets where you put the file inside of that file folder, you know, and then you can see it more readily. So I took the index Larry, because Larry's been interested in general semantics for 40 years, same as I. He and I knew of him when he was at Purdue. I was at Northwestern. He reminded me, we communicated 35 years ago. And in a letter to me, he says, we finally got together. So what I did is go through the entire index. You see, many, many different things. Well, Korzybski has principles on logic, page 70, 90, 93, 95, 141. And I'm going to go through the entire book, each principle, with my Xerox copying machine, and then it'll be all ready to be written up in terms of what Korzybski said. In other words, rewriting it from that point of view. So I can pass this off to future generations. We have two organizations of scholars. One is the International Society of General Semantics, and they have the magazine, etc., ETC. And take a look at it. It's in the library in your communication school here. In fact, we had a little meeting the other day, and all they have there are books, is the magazine, etc. But they're going to get some more, and I will give you, before I leave my lecture series, I'll give you this book. In fact, Larry, you had somewhere that this was going to be one of the texts, and Paul Johnson, who's the director of the International Society of General Semantics, was a little concerned because they only have 5 left. But I will give you some of these, and then I will give you my book, and I will talk about this on logic and general semantics, the paper-bound one here. And then I did give you this to make a copy of the article I wrote when Dr. Lee died. He had in his class, if we were to apply the principles of general semantics to our behavior, what would we look like? How would we behave? What is the mythical semantic man or woman like? And when Dr. Lee died, I wrote an article that was published in the General Semantics Bulletin called Irving J. Lee, the Semantic Man. And if you would have that printed, Larry, and we can hand it out. And then, of course, this book will be available in your communication library. I lectured to an international management conference. I told you that when I was in Chicago, although I was working my way through school, and even after, I was working in the biggest supper club in Chicago. And that, as I say, after getting the PhD, first time I didn't have any financial difficulties, and it was a means to an end. When I was a kid, as some of you might say, our parents and our grandparents came from the old country, couldn't speak English, couldn't read or write. They had to work with their back. And that's why I tell the youngsters to go to college, so you can work with your brain. This is what success motivation is all about. Earl Nightingale, in many of his cassettes, has talked about the difference between man who can work with his brain and animals who have to pull, or some of our folks had to do heavy labor. So that's why I say education is so important. Specialized knowledge. Knowledge is power, says Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich. And that was Andrew Carnegie's formula of how to become a millionaire, how to become successful. He learned it the hard way, as I told you. Poor young man from Scotland who came over and amassed a $500 million fortune, or more than that today. W. Clement Stone, president of the Combined Insurance Company of America, took that little booklet. In fact, the one who gave it to him, Abraham Pickus, was a little friend of mine from San Diego. He used to come into my seminars here in San Diego, management consultant. He gave that book, and what's his name, W. Clement Stone, had $100 in his pocket. With that book, he amassed a $500 million fortune, which is probably more today. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I talk a little bit about success motivation because I want you to become aware that there are many cassettes. I told you yesterday or Monday, I've written and recorded 140 educational and success motivation cassettes. And I'm not even trying to market them because I don't want to go back into business. But there's a lot of knowledge that everybody needs, and especially you youngsters, you have your whole life ahead of you if you're going to apply the principles. 5% of the people in our country apply the principles of success motivation. That's why I say it's easy to become a millionaire, because there's no competition. People are content with mediocrity. They're content with the way their lives are. Nobody's going to do it for you except you yourself, as you well know. Okay, let me mention some of these books here. The young lady here, I'm sorry I don't know your names, but we had a real fine discussion, and she's a better teacher of general semantics and communication than I am. And we were talking, and all the things that she was telling me, this is exactly what we're doing. I was very pleased to see how much knowledge and background in what you've studied already, you see. And she talked about the importance of how. And I will talk about this relative to time binding, but how do you do particular things? This is called, Percy Bridgman was a philosopher who invented basically operational definitions. You see, you used to have old verbal definitions. Man is an animal. And Korzybski used to walk up and down the rostrum and say, oh yeah, man is an intelligent animal. He said, yeah, where the hell is it? We have more fights and arguments and disagreements, confusions. This is what I want you to look up and put in your communication or semantic diary, especially from your personal life. See, Irving Lee conducted a class in which he had case studies. He lectured at Harvard University, and he came home with case studies in communication and management. But in my class, if I had a semester, you see, I didn't have a book on case studies, as one of Dr. Lee's book is. I had my students bring their own case studies from their own life. I think it's more meaningful. So an operational definition, the best example of an operational definition is a cookbook. If you want to find out what a cake is, take a look at a cookbook. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. We're trying to get away from the old metaphysical, verbal definitions. And one of the books that I'm reading now, and I find it very interesting, is The History of Materialism versus Idealism. Materialism deals with a nonverbal world of reality, with nature. And many, many years ago, we had what was called speculative philosophy. I have in my library some little paperbacks, speculative philosophy, and then we went from metaphysics, which deals with words and ideals, you see, the idealism of Plato and Bishop Berkeley, and then sooner or later you had to get, and then Aristotle was very pragmatic and practical compared to Plato. But Korzybski calls general semantics non-Aristotelian. He was not anti-Aristotle. In fact, in this book, Korzybski honors the great geniuses of the history of man. Aristotle, Galileo, Poincaré, Einstein, and I will talk more about the difference between Aristotelian and what we mean by non-Aristotelianism. But general semantics is the first non-Aristotelian theory of man. This means that Korzybski is bringing up to date what Bertrand Russell did, what disparate or separated, disjuncted kinds of studies were in neurology, in psychology, in anthropology, in linguistics, in communication, you see? And he brought them together into one system. Now, I'm going to repeat myself because I always think that this is important. But when you separate all of these things, this is called elementalism. And I might apologize to you, as I said before, I'm violating one of the principles that we teach. Don't try to do too much if you want to be an effective public speaker. If you can get one or two ideas across, this is all you can do. But admittedly, I'm trying to get as much as I can in the 6 meetings we have together. I'll cover public speaking a little more because I think it's so important. I'll talk about that. Elementalism. This is verbally splitting that which is not separate empirically. Verbally, we can separate things which you cannot separate in the world of reality. I just mentioned all of these. Psychobiology they have now, 30, 40, 50 years ago, or however when, they didn't have psychobiology. And if you read magazines or books, you see they're bringing them together. The best examples of elementalism are mind and body. Notice the little word and. Space and time. Heredity and environment. Let's put observer and or that which is observed. Well, mind and body. You cannot separate the mind from the body, obviously. They work together. Space and time. That's why I dig into so much of Einstein's stuff, because you cannot separate space and time. Instead of having the old, what we say, what a thing is, the old essence philosophy, modern science talks about relationships, because what a thing is, for example, ice cream. Ice cream is ice cream, and I'll talk about the different uses of the word is. Notice we're using language, and language has certain structure, which structural linguistics and semanticists are inserted. There are a lot of different professors teaching from a different point of view. The ice cream is ice cream. Oh yeah? Leave it under the sun for 2 minutes, it ain't the same. See what I'm saying? We'll talk about change and differences. Another thing, cheese is cheese. Well, that's why rat traps are so effective. Because to a rat, cheese is cheese. But I maintain there's a difference of cheese 1, and here is an index, and I'm going to keep hitting at this because you're all interrelated. Cheese 1 inside of a rat trap is not the same as cheese 2 outside of a rat trap. Now notice the little numbers I'm using. These are called indices. It's an index. An index. Because our language tends to imply similarities only. Student, woman, actor, actress, hypnotist, as if they're all the same, entertainer. See what I mean? Write this down. Our language tends to imply similarities only. Our language tends to imply similarities only. Student. Well, I look upon you. I don't see anyone here who's identical. You're all different. But our language does not show the differences to be found in the world of reality. This is the importance of seeing differences. And we tend to see similarities only. This is called identification. I got jokes and illustrations on this, but I'm ahead of myself because all of these are interrelated. Identification, or please put down the misevaluation of identification. The misevaluation of identification is when we see similarities only. The misevaluation of identification is when we see similarities only. When we identify different people, situations, and things as if they're all the same. When we identify, and underline the word identify. When we identify different people, situations, and things as if they were the same or as if they're identical. In other words, this is when we allow our language to do our thinking for us. And especially in the area of race or politics or religion, whenever you have these high-order abstractions, these are abstract words, and they imply similarities only. I'll get into a little bit of the difference between low-order abstractions, words that are specific and concrete, and high-order abstractions, words that are general. And this is when we have our problem. Now, relative to identification, what we want to teach everybody is called non-identity. Non-identity. Later on, I'll draw a picture of the structural differential to show you the different orders of abstraction. Non-identity on different levels. Yesterday, I talked about the word is not the thing, right? Non-identity. African American 1 is not African American 2. Or take any race or religion, executive, teacher, anything. The Ku Klux Klan acts as if they're all the same. This kind of stupidity. And there are a lot of hate mongers who act as if they're all the same. And our psychology classes teach us do not stereotype people. But they don't teach us how to do it or how not to do it. You see, general semantics has an operational definition of how to be sane. Write that down, please. General semantics has once in a while I come up with these gems, and I've got to pause to surprise myself. I don't even know what I said. General semantics provides an operational definition of how to be sane. General semantics provides an operational definition of how to be sane. And that's why Korzybski called his book Science and Sanity. What he basically means is the scientific method in everyday human behavior. And there is such a thing. As I told you Monday, Bertrand Russell, around the turn of the century, said what this world needs is the application of the scientific method to everyday human behavior. You know, I think I didn't get to a few people who aren't here. Maybe I'm inferring, I'm jumping to conclusions. That'll be the next lecture. But I read people. See, as a nightclub hypnotist, I can tell with almost 100% accuracy when people come up on stage, the ones who will be hypnotized and the ones who won't. I'll talk about body language, kinesics, nonverbal communication, our unconscious assumptions. And the trouble with teaching general semantics is the ones who need this kind of training the most are never here. We used to have our brochure for the University of Chicago's Management Development Seminar. And the president will get this, hey, Joe Lloyd, this looks pretty good. Communication skills and management. Here, Joe, you take it. And who do you think needs it the most? I'll never forget when I had one president at one of the management seminars, and he was fighting me all the way. And I'll be a son of a gun if the next seminar his assistant didn't take the course. And he said he wanted me to take it. He got a lot. You see, you never know who's getting it or who isn't. He says, I want you to know that he got a lot out of it, but it didn't change his behavior. This bastard needed that kind of training. Didn't change him at all. Another colonel at Northwestern University's Traffic Institute was arguing. He didn't understand. He didn't agree. He didn't believe. Wrote to me about 6 months later, And he wanted this little quiz. He said, I want you to know that during the course I didn't believe one damn word you've said. Now I find myself practicing the principles. Please send me the quiz so I can give this to my students. So it takes time for you to understand or internalize, and I think in our 6 meetings together, you'll see examples of behavior. I hope you can see them in yourself. Learning comes from home first, and then you'll be able to see them in others, especially in your communication or your semantic diary. And I sincerely hope that all of you will be interested in, or some of you, and hopefully you could go on. If you're still in communication, let me just say that if you're a teacher of communication, you can become not only a teacher, a professor of communication, but a management consultant, communication consultant, because they need this kind of a course in business and industry. The biggest problem in business and industry is communication. But from a practical point of view, when I was teaching, I took over a class at the University of Chicago. As I recall, it was in how to use the telephone. And then when I taught this class, it was an elective. And the executive said, we feel everyone should have it. So they put my course near the beginning. And they also said that the executives that followed, they were better students. They were better listeners. They were open-minded. You'll see what I mean when I cover the other principles. Okay, let me go into this very quickly. Space and time, heredity and environment, observer and observed. I told you I'm reading a lot of books on Einstein and nuclear physics, quantum mechanics. And Niels Bohr, what he discovered, ain't no such thing as certainty. He and Heisenberg's principle of indeterminacy. And later on I will tie this into communication, because I use the terminology, we have misunderstandings because we orient our life in terms of the assumption of certainty. You say something to me, and I know what you mean, as if I'm handing you a container of meaning. But Dr. Lee coined a word, I'm sure he coined it, called the container myth, and I will go into this more fully. The container myth. Remember I asked you yesterday how many of you were taught that words have meaning, and all of you raised your hand. Well, the container myth, Dr. Lee said, is the mythical assumption. The mythical assumption that words contain meaning. The container myth. And this is why we have so many misunderstandings, because our English classes teach us the meaning of words. Words, all of you are listening to a different lecture. Am I right? You're listening with your own assumptions, attitudes, beliefs, disbeliefs, etc., etc. And the tragedy is you cannot get on everybody's channel of communication. And don't even try. Do the best you can. But whether you're a salesman or a teacher, you can't get to everybody. Some people are just not open to suggestion. Some people may be sick. I will talk about psychiatry and communication. And this brings us to, well, let's go to the next book. The first popular book, I don't know if there are 1 or 2 ends. It's been so long since I've been teaching. Stuart Chase's The Tyranny of Words, published in 1936. And it's an excellent book. In fact, the two books that I got interested in semantics were The Tyranny of Words by Stuart Chase in junior college back in Minnesota, and Ogden and Richards' The Meaning of Meaning. Pick that book up. He writes about semantics. These were the early interests of semantics and teachers. Ogden and Richards, The Meaning of Meaning, and Stuart Chase's The Tyranny of Words. Now this is an excellent book from one point of view. He was the first one to popularize general semantics relative to politics, economics, but he was criticized, and rightly so, because he said poverty, for example, is a high-order abstraction, and high-order abstractions are meaningless. Now, don't tell that to a person who's sleeping on the street. And all of our hearts go out to people who are street people. But also there's some reason, whether they're involved with drugs, alcoholic, their schizophrenia. I've been very close to schizophrenia for many, many years. A member of my family, I was the first one to diagnose it. You have to live with it. And one of the characteristics of a schizophrenic, they don't communicate. That's why communication is so important. Adequate, effective communication is a characteristic of a human kind of life, of a healthy life. Put that down, please. Adequate or effective communication is characteristic of a human kind of life, of a happy kind of life, mature, whereas lack of communication is characteristic of mental illness. The schizophrenics, they don't communicate with, and I go into the halfway houses, and they don't communicate with anyone else. There are degrees of mental illness. I've got a lot of cassettes on psychiatry. I think I have, and I haven't marketed, the most complete introduction to Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis ever recorded. And we are concerned with psychology and communication and telling the truth. And there are two kinds of people in this world, and we're reading about them now, who lie, who tell false to fact statements. And I've been concerned about this ever since my professional career, because you'd be amazed at how many con men there are in hypnosis. They open up offices, they promise they can hypnotize everybody, and you can't. They promise they can cure you, which you can't. You don't know a priori or before the fact. You only know a posteriori, after the fact. And that's why if I charged people for therapy, and I could have charged a lot of money, I would have felt like a quack or a con man. But I always helped everybody for nothing. That's how I built my following here. I've helped thousands and thousands of students, for example, who got 1 and 2 grades better after they were hypnotized on my show. What I'm saying is the academic fraternity, medical doctors, psychologists, they don't know anything about hypnosis and its uses. That's where your mental and physical powers are. But you've got to guard against some of the psychopaths. In fact, these are called character disorders. They're not insane. Character disorders. There are two basic kinds of people with character disorders. One is the psychopathic liar. Psychopathic liar. And I'm saying this because I hope you guys and you girls don't get involved with psychopathic liars. There are plenty of them around. Psychopathic liar and the other character disorder, they're related, are sociopaths. Sociopaths. We saw one, if you found the other day, I'm just catching up on that much of our newspapers, the one on this young man who wanted to buy the Sockers. Con man, a sociopath. And the characteristic of the sociopath is they have no conscience. They have no conscience. They look you right and straight in the eye and speak false to fact. They'll tell you a lie. Later on, I'll give you different kinds of lies and language, etc. But I talk about this because don't trust people too readily. Don't react too quickly, either liking them or disliking them. Irving Lee used to say, hold off. Wendell Johnson in his book, and I'll talk about a little bit about the book right here, People in Quandaries, he says, you know, some of these women, they have an idealized version inside their head. The ideal man, husband, got to be tall, dark, and handsome. Oh boy. They get married. These are the defined terms. Tall, dark, and handsome. The defined terms. Terms that are defined in their mind. And then after they get married and her life becomes thoroughly enmeshed in his, the undefined terms come into play. The undefined terms come into play. He's not only tall, dark, and handsome, but he's shiftless, lazy, no good, and unfaithful. And the most important thing in our relationships and in our contracts, write that down, please. The most important thing in our relationships and in our contracts. Because see, when you sign a contract, the defined terms are in the contract. Obviously, you always sign a contract with another human being. And the undefined terms are in his nervous system. I didn't mean that. That word didn't mean that. We're finding this now. You see what I'm saying? So try to dig out their undefined terms. Korzybski talked about this, and philosophy very often didn't consider the undefined terms. Okay, so the tyranny of words is a good introduction. The best psychological interpretation of general semantics is People in Quandaries. Please read that book. These will all be available sooner or later in the communication library. Larry, let me know what ones you don't get. I'll pay for the ones from the International Society. There are a lot of different ones, and I've got a lot more in the book I just edited. The only good thing I did about this, I left Lee's book as it was. But I took out the dated footnotes. It was published in 1941, same as Hayakawa's book. And at that time, there weren't many articles or books written about general semantics. So at the end of every chapter, I put books that relate to that chapter. And at the end of the entire book, I put a bibliography of the most important books written up to this time. And I brought the book up to date. To me, this is perhaps the finest introduction of general semantics, Irving Lee's book. But People in Quandaries, and please read this. If you have any psychological problems, or if you're interested in psychology, I think you really will enjoy it. By the way, we're going to bring Nicholas Johnson, his son, to UCSD, and here, Larry, we're going to combine both. Nicholas Johnson, very bright guy, great lecturer. He was the former head of the Federal Communications Commission. He was Wendell Johnson's son, so we're going to try to bring him here. Here's Irving Lee's book. This is an excellent book because it's easy to understand, both of these. Science and the Goals of Man and Operational Philosophy. Very easy to understand. If any of you are into philosophy, communication and organizational behavior. Bill Haney also got his doctor's degree with Dr. Lee, who was an assistant. When Dr. Lee got cancer and couldn't lecture, I took over the class. And then Bill became a professor, and I went into other areas. But it seems that we're both choosing the same jokes out of Reader's Digest. He has a lot in his book. It was revised into this, but it's an excellent book on communication and organizational behavior. Actually, he also took from Dr. Lee's other book on customs and crises in communication, and he added the two together. Okay, and then my books, Understanding and Being Understood Before I Leave. I gave one to Larry, the copy, the one on Irving J. Lee, The Semantic Man, and I will give you copies. There will be copies in your library, and then I will also give you, I've got 250 or 500 of my little booklets. Why do we jump to conclusions? But I prefer to go through the sessions with you before you read it. Why do we jump to conclusions? Understanding, Being Understood, a smaller version of this. The Closed Mind, and How to Lessen Misunderstandings. And one last one, my book you will have on Logic and General Semantics. Now see here, this is Aristotelian logic. It was limited. And I draw a circle around it like we do with Aristotelian assumptions. You draw a circle around it. These are wider, non-Aristotelian assumptions. Or the circle around Aristotelian logic, a wider definition of logic, which includes F.S.C. Schiller's work, very famous philosopher, on criticizing Aristotle's philosophy. There are many others, especially the Polish logicians. And I will read, and by the way, I mentioned, read Oliver Reiser's book, The Promise of Scientific Humanism. Well, what this is, I took part one, and we reproduced this. This is the history of thought from a general semantics point of view. Part one. I'll talk about this a little later. Well, we want to pass everything out to you, and I've accomplished one thing that I've never done in my life. I've never given a lecture without my jokes and illustrations. It's been a great audience. Thank you.